Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and welcome to the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Terry Iverson as my expert guest, and we have a really exciting conversation to share with you today. Terry is the founder of the organization CHAMPIONNOW, and he believes there is nothing more important than the young people of this country. He says that the manufacturing industry relies on the next generation of skilled workers, managers, and entrepreneurs to lead this country into a prosperous future. CHAMPIONNOW exists to change the image of manufacturing from the unrealistic, stereotypical, dark and dirty industry to one that is filled with extreme technology, advanced innovations, and exhilarating and good-paying careers available for the next generation. CHAMPIONNOW has created a platform to move manufacturing forward. Together with the power of industry supporters, Terry hopes to reach the next generation with exciting educational films, presentations, and internships that demonstrate how manufacturing is the foundation of our American economy and offers exhilarating career choices. Terry is also the author of the book Finding America's Greatest Champion. In this book, he interviewed people from all walks of life. These are not the people you would expect to fly the manufacturing flag. These are Americans, some in manufacturing, but many are not. Still, they believe in the call to change how American manufacturing is perceived in the United States. We will discuss all of this in great detail today. So now, without any further delay, I'm really excited to welcome Terry to the podcast. It's great to have you here, Terry.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you. I'm honored to be on your show.
Thanks so much for being here and giving us your time. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And before we get into it, I know that you have a really interesting family background and one that's deeply immersed in manufacturing. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background? And also tell us about your company. I mentioned your book and your organization in the intro, but we also want to hear a little bit about your company.
Oh, sure. My grandfather got involved in the manufacturing sector in about 1925 as a very young man. He started working for a machine tool company in Chicago, and he worked there for about 5 years, and then the company got transferred out to the state of New York, and he ended up staying behind. Even though he had an opportunity to move to New York, he stayed behind and started our company, which is a machine tool distribution company, and we rebuild equipment. So my dad got out of college in late 1950s, 58, I believe, and he joined the family business.
And what's the name of the company?
Iverson Company. We sell machine tools, we rebuild machine tools, and we're located in the Chicagoland area, but we sell to customers in the region, primarily 3 states, but then around the rest of the country. And so I started in 1980 as a young man. We were living in Wisconsin at the time. So I worked there for about 5 years and then came down to Illinois in about 1986.
Okay, and so your company is still operating there in Chicago.
We are.
You kind of carried the manufacturing flag for your family.
Yeah, there's been a number of family members, both cousins. I have Mike, one of my cousins, Mike Turnstrom. He's also with the business for now 41 years. We've had a variety of different cousins and nephews, and my son and my daughter for a period of time. My uncles were involved as they had their own machine shops. So we've been in manufacturing for quite a long time. In about another 4 years, it'll probably be about 100 years that our family's been in manufacturing.
Wow, that's amazing. So you definitely have seen a lot and can tell us a lot about the evolution of manufacturing. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But as I mentioned in the intro, you've written a book about American manufacturing. So tell us about the book and also tell us what inspired you to write it.
Wow. Okay. Let me try to be very succinct. Well, as far as the book goes, I try to be an advocate for manufacturing careers and inspire and enlighten young people in this country that there's careers that you don't have to spend $250,000 for an education. And a lot of manufacturers are eager for young people that are willing to learn and have an aptitude and love to work with their mind and their hands. And so a lot of times these manufacturing companies will actually pay for education while you even work for them. And so the entry point is a much less burden from a financial standpoint. So with the student debt crisis in this country, that's one of the things that is very important to me. The subtitle of the book is Building Prosperity Through Manufacturing, Mentoring, and the Awesome Responsibility of Parenting. So I try to give a value add for those people who want to know about manufacturing, and then a value add for others that maybe don't know about it and not necessarily looking into it, but then are enlightened, kind of a soft sell by getting into the book for different reasons and then finding out a whole new world that they never knew existed. As far as the inspiration of why I wrote the book, well, after having my family in manufacturing for as long as we have, and I didn't really see anybody having the desire to give back in this way, back to the manufacturing sector. And I had been involved in technical education for about the last 25 years with Project Lead the Way courses in high schools and community college programs, CTE, which is Careers in Technical Engineering or Education. And so consequently, with all this experience and knowledge or exposure to all these different programs, I just felt it would be just silly to lose all this information and keep it within my head, so to speak, and put it out there so that people would be able to learn about it and it wouldn't be this best kept secret in the industry.
Yeah, I love that inspiration. I love that reason behind sharing this knowledge. It's a great thing. We talk on this program, on this podcast all the time about this manufacturing skills gap that exists out there and how more people are retiring from manufacturing jobs and fewer people are entering manufacturing jobs. And how do we close that gap? It sounds like that's a lot of what you talk about.
It is. I think there's also another definition of what's going on. There is a skills gap, but there's also an opportunity gap, and young people don't realize all these really great opportunities. And they're not even able to make a conscious decision that, hey, that's for me, or, you know what, that's not for me. They don't even know it exists. And so we have this other definition going on called the silver tsunami. Older people like me with gray hair that are just exiting the workforce and leaving a void for somebody has to step into those employment positions.
That's interesting. I've never heard that term, the silver tsunami, but that's exactly what's happening. I always use the term machine whisperers. So you have these guys that go out onto the shop floor and they know these machines so well, and they don't have a lot of documentation. Maybe some of them have some skills with technology, but not all of them. It's kind of what I call old school manufacturing, where they use their senses to take the temperature of the machine and they know how hot it's supposed to be or how it's supposed to be vibrating or moving or running. And they can tell that. So they're retiring and they're taking that knowledge with them. And so the new generation has to learn it all over again. And of course, then there's all this new technology. So it really is an issue out there. I've been covering manufacturing for over 12 years now, which of course is not as long as you've been involved, but it's been a topic that entire time.
No, you're right about the machine whispers, as you call it. I'll be standing at a machine, and when I evaluate a machine before we ship out, I'll actually close my eyes and just listen. And you can walk through shops and you can literally smell when chips are being made if the amount of heat coming off the chip is such that it's being processed correctly. You can put your hand on a machine and feel the vibration, and if the vibration is excessive and more than it should be. So there's all sorts of different aspects of, really being good at your craft or your trade. And I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely correct.
We have to do all we can to make sure that more people are entering careers in manufacturing because it's still a huge supporter of jobs for our nation. I also know that a lot of the manufacturers I talk to really have a hard time finding people to hire in America. They have to go outside the U.S. to find qualified workers. At least that was been the case in the past. Do you think that's changing?
Well, no, I think you're right, and I challenge manufacturers around the country that we need to do a better job of being advocates for our own craft and our own trade. And sometimes leaders in manufacturing companies, they get busy running their companies, and they need to step back and look at the big picture. And they need to be more active advocates for our industry and for our trade and for these jobs.
I
But I think
agree completely.
but
Yes.
I think the other thing that I think needs to be understood or at least appreciated is you have all these manufacturers that want to mentor the next generation. And they truly do. And sometimes the young next generation isn't really open to the mentoring process. It may be a foreign circumstance for them. But I try to point out that the next generation also has the ability and the opportunity to reverse mentor the older individual within the manufacturing company. A lot of these individuals have this tribal knowledge, as you said, Michelle. But what they don't realize is that a lot of them don't have the technology that these young people have. These young people were literally almost born with an iPhone in their hand practically.
That's exactly right.
So they have these technology gains and knowledge that a lot of the older element in manufacturing doesn't have. There's a win-win on both sides. The young person can reverse mentor the older individual in the manufacturing sector. And of course, that individual can mentor the young person.
That's so true. There's so much to be learned from both sides. We have to make sure that they're each sharing that knowledge that they have. It's only going to make manufacturing better if they can do that. And I think there are companies that are trying to do that. Now, you and I have had some long conversations. We've both been to many manufacturing companies, home and abroad, and you obviously have a passion for American manufacturing. So tell us why this is so important to you.
If you study economic history globally, any country that has a prosperous base or a prosperous economy, it all ties back to manufacturing. And if you historically go back in the US, you'll find that manufacturing is a big part of our success and always has been and always has to be. So one thing that you see is in Europe, they have a very profound appreciation for people that make things. And I think we had that at one point, but then somewhere along the way, probably in the early to mid 80s, I would say, someone made the mistake of saying that we were going to be a service-based economy. And obviously that term made me cringe at the time, and it still does. To have a prosperous and thriving middle class, you have to have manufacturing jobs. Absolutely.
That
And
is
so
100% correct. Yes.
And so our culture somehow, once again, starting in the mid 80s or thereabouts, what ended up happening is a lot of our apprenticeships started to fade away. We had a really vibrant apprenticeship program if you go back, say, in the late 70s and backwards. And in Europe, they still have apprenticeships, usually a lot of very proactive and forward-thinking manufacturers. They have 10% of their workforce in an active apprenticeship program. And so now what you're finding is the German Chamber of Commerce around the country is actively instituting and reinventing and becoming more active in apprenticeship programs now, which is very exciting.
Yes, it is very exciting. And these apprenticeship programs, you and I have both seen them work in many different places in other countries, particularly in Europe, as you mentioned. And it makes so much sense. These companies are training people to work for them. And not only does that give those people the specific skills that they need to enter a career with that company, but the company also benefits because they're being specifically trained for that particular type of manufacturing. So it just makes sense. And I do think some American manufacturers are starting to do this a little bit more. Do you see that?
I do. And I also write in the book about that there almost needs to be a hybrid where somehow internships are introduced into apprenticeship. And I actually coined a term called a printernship.
Ah,
It's
clever.
it's hard. It's hard to say, and people probably, when they read the book, probably didn't understand it. But I feel so strongly that internships are such a widely accepted and are becoming more accepted every day in our culture here. And the apprenticeship model is starting to come back, but we almost need a blend of internships and apprenticeships. And so I challenge our leaders throughout the country in both the manufacturing companies that have internship programs and also the apprenticeship programs around the country that they consider blending the two. Whether they use the term apprenticeship or not, that's impossible to say. It doesn't really matter, but I think it fits in our culture a little bit better.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I do think it'll catch on. I think is what it says it is. And I think you're onto something there. I like that. Now, you mentioned a little bit about some of the changes that happened in the 80s. And you've been in American manufacturing most of your life, or at least from the perspective of your family being involved in it too. I'm always intrigued by the history and the evolution of manufacturing. So from your perspective, what are some of the greatest advancements you've seen in your career? Like, when have you seen something where, oh, this really made a difference, and then the next step and the next step? Can you take us through from your perspective that evolution?
I got involved in 1980, and computerized equipment was just starting to come onto the scene. When my dad was in the middle portion of his career, a lot of the manufacturing was being done on manual machines and in some cases automatic equipment, but not necessarily CNC equipment. So there was such a thing called NC, or numerically controlled, but it wasn't computer numerically controlled, which is
Right.
CNC. And so you had point-to-point programming when I first started, which very laborious and very long programs. And they had such a thing as paper tape that you had to load in the program with little dots punched into the paper tape.
Mm-hmm.
And then CNC came on the scenes for me probably in the 1980, 1982 range. And so I learned on CNC, and I learned to sell CNC equipment. And so that came through, but we really hadn't entered into a scenario where machines were being fully functional to make completed parts. So in the factories, what you'd see is you would see batch manufacturing. You would have a turning department. You would have a milling department. You would have a grinding department. What would happen is you'd batch 5,000 pieces through the lathe, and then 5,000 pieces through the mill, and the same 5,000 pieces through a grinder. Well, what happened is the quantity started coming down. Once in the late 80s, early 90s, it became much more of a world market. And when the internet hit in 96 or thereabouts, then it really became a global market. And so the quantities started coming down. Well, what that means is batch manufacturing is not really cost effective. So then what you want to do is you want to do both operations, first and second operation on the lathe together. And then if you can do any secondary operations like drilling or milling, then you can get a completed part, and then you skip the milling department and you go right to the grinder. Then you can ship completed parts. Well, then as years went on, going into the 2000s, so to speak, then automation, then you had castings or pre-machined blanks that were loaded by individuals, and then robotics came onto the scene. And so robotics were primarily large manufacturers of robots that were very costly. Point of entry from a cost standpoint was pretty extreme, but Europe had been automating for decades before we embraced it. Robots were difficult to program. There was resistance from the workforce that these are taking jobs away from us. And while I would say that to a point, there are some jobs that are being taken away, there's many other jobs that are being created that are higher paying jobs. The fact that a person would stand in front of a machine and load the machine and do nothing else but that is really a rote, mechanical, not very challenging job or job responsibility. If an operator can check parts, set up the machine, program the robot, keep the robot running, those are much higher skilled jobs and much higher paying jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And then of late, I've seen in recent decade, I've seen cobots come on the scene. The advantage of cobots is the cost of entry. The entry point in terms of a pricing is much less, and they're much easier to integrate.
Well, tell me what a cobot is. I don't think I've heard that term.
Well, a cobot is what they call a collaborative robot. What that means is instead of, having an interface that's extremely complex and having guarding around the machine and the robot moving at extremely high speeds, the cobot is taught where the grippers go, where the direction they go to get to an entry point, to enter the machine, to load the machine. And it duplicates or emulates what an operator would do. Open the door, close the door, push the cycle start button, and etc. So it's easier to program, easier to operate. They call it collaborative. The cost is much less, and you don't have all these integration because it doesn't move nearly as fast, and it's much safer. They have actual sensors so that if it was to strike something or come up against something, i.e. a person, that it would stop. That made automation more tangible and more relevant and more cost effective, and our culture in this country embraced it much more readily. And now going forward from that, what I'm seeing is the Internet of Things and big data. And big data came on the scenes with all the advent of the internet and with all the advent of smartphones. And so now we're starting to collect data and use this data to actually help us understand our processes better and to manage them better from a standpoint of tool life, machine uptime, and all sorts of other facets, get machine scheduling. The last thing that I would say that I'm starting to also see on the market and appearing on the market is voice commands, where now probably in the next 5 years, people walk up to a machine tool and actually give it voice commands to either start the process or program the process on a CNC machine or manage the process. You'll have AI, artificial intelligence, where the machine will actually respond back and either confirm what's been being asked or ask another question for direction. So that's what I've seen as far as the timeline over the years, over the 41 years that I've been involved, and what I see a little bit coming in the future.
Yeah, I think it's all fascinating. And I'm really interested in what you said about how this assembly line type of manufacturing, where you had human beings sitting there putting parts together, small parts in small steps and going down the assembly line. Now a robot can do that. And when the robots first came out, the people were really worried that they were losing their jobs. But as you said, it was a benefit because they could learn new skills and get higher paying jobs and actually do something that was actually more challenging and more stimulating than sitting there putting the same part together for a whole shift.
Exactly. It's easy to see that people would be very sheepish to accept the automation, but it's upon us as manufacturers to explain and promote why it's a benefit. It's a benefit to the manufacturers because they have to be competitive. The more competitive that they can be, the price of the product comes down. And if that happens, the more products we sell, the more we'll need additional people, higher skilled and higher paid employees to continue the process and manage the process or program it or inspection positions in employment and all other facets. So I can honestly see where people would, back in the early 80s, be reluctant to accept automation, but it's up to us as manufacturers to explain the whole process and why it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I agree completely. And I've asked this question so many times to so many different people in the years that I've been covering and writing and reporting about manufacturing. I've asked experts, do you think that robots will eventually completely replace the human being? And I've not had one person tell me that they would eliminate the human element. How do you feel about that?
No, it's like the internet. People thought the internet was going to solve everything and replace everything. And that's not the case. The internet has been a great tool, the web and emails and all sorts of other facets of the computerization. Our culture has learned to accept that. Well, in manufacturing, in order to be globally competitive, that's changed as well. But to say that critical thinking skills and the problem solving skills, no, I don't see that being replaced by robots. And what I definitely don't see is the ingenuity and the creativeness. That's what makes humans different, is that they can critically think, problem solve, and be innovative and create all sorts of new products and new processes.
Yes, I agree completely. And when you think about it, you still need human beings to program the robots and to program the automation and to analyze the data. It's one thing to get the data. It's another thing to know what to do with it. And even though machines are starting to communicate with each other and even make critical decisions, you still need that human element. And of course, you still need humans to repair the equipment because it's going to break down at some point. We know that. So, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the human element will go away, no matter how automated we get. It's never going to be the Jetsons.
No, we're not going to get to that. At least I hope not.
Yeah.
There's always a need for people with experience and skills and critical thinking to solve the problems. Because
That's right. And creativity and to look into their crystal ball and see what we can do better in the future. That really does take the human element. And this is actually a good segue because I've been reading your book, and one of the talking points that you highlight is about changing the way we view the art of manufacturing. And I'm wondering if you can tell our listeners what you mean by this.
When I was a young person, I would get bored very easily. And so I didn't learn typically the way a lot of students learn. And so I enjoyed working with my hands, making things, and I enjoyed seeing things being made. And so consequently, manufacturing is an art. To understand the blend of art and science is something that I've been able to appreciate and enjoy for 4 decades now. So when you think about a lot of these craftsmen that have been at this for so long, they're blending what they've learned from a science standpoint and taking the creativity, the human element, so to speak, and brought that into an art form. And so I think that's really one of the things that the United States and America that we do very, very well is that we continually innovate, we continually create new products, and part of our culture demands it. We're one of the largest, if not, we're actually one of the largest consuming economies on the planet, China and of course the US. So our culture demands new products, and you'll see as things innovate that our culture changes and adapts. And then of course the products change and adapt as well. So it is an art form, and that's where the human element really shines.
I would say this too. I've been in a lot of manufacturing facilities all over the world, and so have you. And no matter what's being made, whether it's potato chips or yogurt or equipment or EPS foam, everything is a little bit different. So these manufacturers may use some of the same processes and some of the same lean manufacturing skills and ideas and some of the same technology, but it's still very different in every single facility. I've never seen two that were that were different companies, even if they were making the same thing. They do it a little bit different.
One of the things with when COVID hit and everybody kind of retreated back into their homes and into their workplaces, one of the things that I tried to do is create videos to explain the relevance of manufacturing to young people.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the segments that I tried to start with was talking about manufacturing in your life. And I would take a component and I would say, well, here's a component. Here's a trumpet mouthpiece that we made. And here's a level for construction that we made. Here's a part to an IBM computer that we made. Here's a gyro that goes into a guidance system that we made. And so trying to make manufacturing relevant so that people understand it, I think that's what's been missing in our culture, is an appreciation. And this kind of goes back to the art of understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of understanding what manufacturing is and why does it matter? Why is it relevant to me? And the more we can get our culture to understand and appreciate that, then I think we'll start to see people flocking to these positions in employment in careers in manufacturing.
I agree completely. People ask my kids, what does your mom do? And they always say, oh, she has some boring job with manufacturing. And I try to explain to them that it's not boring at all. It is fascinating. It is really high-end technology and is super exciting. And to see the changes in how different things are made is truly fascinating. And I think if people had an opportunity to go and tour a facility, and maybe when we're on the other side of the pandemic, more people will get an opportunity to do this, you might change your tune and think it's not so boring.
I totally agree. And I think years ago, I was indirectly involved with discussions about Manufacturing Day. And every October, shops and manufacturers all over our country open their doors. October 5th, I think, is technically the day, but October has become a manufacturing month.
That's right. It is October. Yeah.
And so all throughout every state, there's manufacturers that are literally opening their doors and asking young people and their parents into their facilities that are 90% of them are extremely clean, or a large percentage of them are very clean, very well lit, very high tech. I challenge people listening to this program, look for a Manufacturing Day in October in your community. Go out and learn at a point when it's early enough in your child's educational career that if they do have an interest, that chances are there is a Project Lead the Way school or a CTE program that they can enter into and then be on their way to a path to a job and to employment and to a career that's not going to take them $250,000 to become skilled at. And they can enter into the workforce debt-free and be into the workforce making money and saving money and starting the life much, much sooner.
Most of these jobs are very high-paying, good jobs with great benefits. And most of these manufacturers, too, are proud to welcome people in. They want to show off what they're doing because they've refined the whole process and made it efficient and lean. And they're happy to show people. And like you said, they're clean facilities with bright, shiny equipment, and they're proud to show it off.
Yeah, I tell young people all around the country when I speak, Michelle, that look, it's okay if after you look at this, that this is not for you, but there's double-digit percentages of people that decide it is for them, and they just didn't know about it. And so that's what it comes down to. As our culture is not aware of all these opportunities or the relevance of what manufacturing in our life means in our everyday life, if we can just do a better job, Manufacturing Day is a huge, huge step in the right direction. We need to do more, but we're going in the right direction.
I agree. And maybe people like me who are reporters and content people, we need to do a better job of promoting it too. We need to make sure there's attention that is brought to things like Manufacturing Day. We talked a little bit about what they're doing in Europe and in other places versus what manufacturers in the United States are doing. And you and I have had this conversation before, and I would love to talk about it on the podcast. You mentioned a few things like the apprenticeship programs and that sort of thing, but what do you think U.S. manufacturers do better than the European manufacturers? And what do you think they do better that we should try and adopt?
Oh boy, that's the $1 million question. Well, first of all, Europe got very, very proficient at making high quality products that had high paying jobs. And part of that was automation, adopting automation early in. And their culture is very accepting, and they hold these professions in very, very high esteem. In the U.S., somehow we lost that luster for manufacturing and skills, and just it's like Mike Rowe being an advocate for dirty jobs and people that want to work with their hands. I think he's awesome. But what the U.S. does really, really well is we're very innovative. We create some of the absolute best products in the world, and we're very good at becoming more efficient and making products more effectively and more efficiently. And so I think really we need to do a better job of promoting the careers, which we've talked about. Our culture needs to do a better job of understanding what is possible and that these jobs are really good paying, hardworking opportunities, and not to look down upon those professions. And I think education needs to also change in this country. And parenting, to be honest, has to change, because the myth that the only path to success, which education and the parental unit seems to think, is through a 4-year degree, that's simply not the case. There's a lot of people that should go down that 4-year degree, and sometimes 5-year, and a lot of times the money should be spent. But more times often than not, what's happening is people are going into careers that are already saturated, and they find out after spending all this money, and it may not even be something that they enjoy as much as something else that they could be doing, they find these long lines and applicants galore for the same position. And so what they don't understand is that there's these other careers where the lines for applications or the lines for openings in careers are much shorter, and there's many, many companies all looking for the same applicants. So when that happens, just supply and demand would tell you that the price of admission, so to speak, or I should say the salary ranges are escalating up because everyone's competing for fewer people. So I think once people realize that and realize that it's not what people think, and they actually find out that the skill set that they have or the aptitude they have is more in line with that than maybe some of the other career choices that they've been made aware of. When that happens, I think the needle will move dramatically.
I think you're right. And I think also we need to make sure that people out there who are ready to enter the job market, whether they're right out of high school or right out of college, whichever way they choose, we need to make these manufacturing jobs more sexy, because they are sexy. It's not just this old idea of Rosie the Riveter or the assembly line where people are just sitting there doing this manual assembly of parts. It's really exciting. It's engineering design. They're using things like digital twin technology and augmented reality and 3D printing. And it really is sexy to get into a career like this. And it's exciting and it's fun. And it's not just this boring assembly line thing that I think a lot of people still think that's what a manufacturing job is.
Yeah, and it's up to us to put some dazzle in what we talk about. Some of my customers and some of the companies that I deal with, they're involved in putting the Mars rover up on Mars and making components. They're making gears and all sorts of different facets of perseverance, I think it is, on Mars. When the Apollo program started, this country united unbelievably on a mission of going in space. And so when we can relate it to the Mars rover or the Hubble telescope or things that are tremendously impactful for humanity and tremendously exciting, well, then I think people might understand. Every different person has a different viewpoint of what they feel is exciting. But I think some of the stories we need to elevate a little bit more than others so that people understand how challenging and how unbelievably exciting different opportunities are.
I agree completely. We talked a little bit earlier about some of the manufacturing trends that you're seeing, but tell me about some other things and kind of look into your crystal ball a little bit more. And let's talk about what we could see in the future.
Oh boy, now you get into the hard questions now.
Some things are not, I wouldn't even call them trends. They're just things that people are doing now that they're starting to adapt.
Well, I think there's definitely an evolution in manufacturing. Now what you're seeing is, and you see this in the high schools, so this is a good thing to talk about. I mean, additive manufacturing was never even talked about when I entered in the industry. It wasn't even designed as a process. So 3D printing is probably one of the game-changing processes that I've seen in recent years. And now you go into a lot of these high school programs and they have 3D printers where they can actually design a part and actually make a working assembly in a matter of hours, hands off. They load a CAD drawing into a computer of an assembly, and then they put it into the 3D printing software, and some hours later, depending on what it is, you actually have an assembled unit that actually works with gears in it or with levers in it that would take you weeks to design, manufacture, assemble, and test. 3D printing is really, I think, something that so many young people can relate to. And that's something that now we're starting to talk about metal cutting as being subtractive manufacturing. And that's all because additive manufacturing came on the scene and we never really knew what that was or even defined what that was until recently.
There's nothing more sexy than 3D printing. It is so fascinating. How could anybody think that was boring or not exciting? That's such a cool thing.
One of the things we don't talk about is how impactful some of these facets, these technologies and these products are to saving lives. I mean, they're actually now going into the biomedical field where they're going to be printing components where, you can potentially correct someone's valve in a heart by 3D printing a part of that artery or a part of that facet of the heart.
Unbelievable.
So
wow.
now you're saving young people's lives. A medical procedure may not be able to do what needs to be done to save that person's life. So I don't think there's anything that can hit home as quickly as getting to the point where you can actually save someone's life. And that's where 3D printing is actually going.
As we talk about the future of manufacturing, do you think most companies I want to stick to American manufacturing companies. Do you think most American manufacturing companies are effectively preparing for the future?
Oh, wow. Well, we've had so many challenges in the recent year or year and a half. So I think a lot of the manufacturers do want to prepare for the future. They've had their challenges with COVID. I think one of the things that COVID has taught us as a country is that we can't rely on everything or as much as we do being made out of our borders. When you look at some of the protective equipment, some of the medications, and some of the things that we realize that, oh my gosh, too much of this is made outside of the US. And so I think a lot of people will start understanding and realizing that, you know what, we need to make more here in this country, and we can't let that happen again. A friend of mine from the Chicago area, Harry Mosier, started a initiative called reshoring. And this has probably been 10, 15 years ago he did that. And so now with the COVID lessons that we've learned, the reshoring initiative, it was doing very, very well before COVID, but I think it's performing even better after COVID. And so that being said, probably 10 years ago, I told Harry, I said, and this is when I decided to start CHAMPIONNOW as an organization, I said, Harry, it is awesome that you're bringing these companies manufacturing back on our shores, but we're going to need more people. We're going to need more workers. We're going to need the next generation to embrace it and sign up to learn how to manufacture, how to design, how to engineer. And so that being said, that's why I felt there was a need to educate and inspire our culture and our communities and our society as a whole, that these positions are available and they're going to be available for a long time to come.
I think you're doing just that, and just getting that message out and the word out, letting people hear and understand what is available out there, because some people just don't know that. So we're kind of getting to the end of the time that we have, and I'm really having fun. I could talk to you all day about this. We've had a lot of interesting conversations already. And I just really want to thank you for being here and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your experience. But I want to give you the last word. So is there anything else that you can tell us about what you're seeing as the future of American manufacturing?
Well, I think the future is bright. I think we need more people to walk the walk and talk the talk, so to speak. And certainly I'm trying to do that. You're trying to do that. And I would encourage others. But I think we need to collectively educate each other and inspire each other. I think getting to the parental unit in this country is important, and it's probably the hardest challenge we have. It's easy to inspire the young people and get in front of the young people and show them what's possible. But we also have to reach the parents and the influencers and the guidance counselors in the schools. So that's why I started Champion Now. That's why I wrote the book, Finding America's Greatest Champion. That's why I produce the videos that can be used in either companies or educational videos to expose different facets of manufacturing. That's called CNC Rocks. So I would encourage people to go to championnow.org and learn more about manufacturing. I'll have your podcast on there, and we'll have a 30% off for the book, Finding America's Greatest Champion. I think maybe in the notes you'll have that.
Yes, absolutely. I'll include a direct link that allows people to get that discount when they buy the book.
And the last thing I would say is, in the month of October, get out to a manufacturer in your neighborhood and go to Manufacturing Day and learn. And there's no better way to learn. There's two ways to learn. Show up in person during Manufacturing Day and Google manufacturing links and videos on YouTube. Those are the two best ways to learn.
I think that's perfect advice. I love that. And that's a great way to end the show. Terry, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. And maybe we'll have you back again because we have so much more we could talk about. Just really thank you for being here.
Michelle, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk what I'm very passionate about and love.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.